dilemma, the resources, like we've discussed in the past, or like actually discussed today. Now, macroeconomics is going to begin to diverge when we talked about the big goals in the macroeconomy. Okay, the macroeconomy is the big picture, the goals that we have are for full employment. And then we talked about, after we talked about full employment, we said, well, how do we measure full employment? We talked about the unemployment rate, the measurement of unemployment. We said another goal is price stability. How do we measure price stability? The consumer price index. Now, there'll be questions on the test about all of that. But, that's pretty easy to review on your own. The types of unemployment, who's hurt by inflation, those kinds of things we talked about that a long time ago. There'll be questions on the test about that. There'll be questions on, the only thing you have to worry about is the AP test. But there'll be questions on the AP test unquestionably about that. GDP determination, the different ways of determining GDP, the income approach, the expenditure approach, questions on the test about that as well. But after we got through that, then we started to talk about these economic models. And we said, the first model was the classical model, and the classical model, classical economists believed that the economy was self-correcting, and then, if there were problems, it was not because of something inherent in the economy, it was because of some kind of external factor that assaulted the economy and caused some sort of disruption, some kind of panic, something like that, and the economy would quickly repair itself. We said that laissez-faire, that the classical model was a justification for laissez-faire, then along came Keynes. And Keynes tried to explain the Great Depression, and Keynes came along and said, oh, no, the economy doesn't self-correct, it's ultimately sort of fueled by demand. Right? The classical economists said, no, it's supply that creates demand. Keynes came along and said, oh, no, it's demand that creates supply. Now, we said all that really, really quickly, in order to get to this. Eventually we got to the aggregate demand and aggregate supply model. We said, okay, if we want to explain how the macroeconomy works, this is the big illustration. This is the big model. And clearly, somewhere on that AP test, usually in the first part of it, you're going to be asked to illustrate a circumstance in the macroeconomy. They're going to say, all right, there's 10% unemployment and 0% inflation and this, and this. Using a well-labeled aggregate demand, aggregate supply model, illustrate, that circumstance in the macroeconomy. So, it took us a long time, actually in classwork, to get up to the aggregate demand, aggregate supply model. And there was a lot of things that we did before that. And there were a lot of things, obviously, that there could potentially be test questions on. There may be, certainly there'll be questions about the classical model. Certainly there'll be some Keynesian questions. So the thing to remember about the classical model, anything about the classical model, one is this, that it's always associated with Say's law, right? And Say's law is supply creates its own demand, right? Say's law is supply creates its own demand. So it's always associated with Say's law and self-correcting. The idea that the economy is self-correcting, and therefore becomes a justification for laissez-faire, letting it go. When you think about Keynes, then automatically when they talk about Keynes, anything to do with Keynes, it involves the demand end of the economy. That ultimately the level of economic activity depends upon the level of demand for that economic activity. And then eventually it's for intervention because you can modify that demand, you can alter that demand. Right? Now, we'll come back to that. But we really want to get to this aggregate supply, aggregate demand model because inevitably you're going to have to use that. So I don't know if you remember, let's take this down. We might put this on the YouTube. Waze is putting a little tiny camera that puts this on the YouTube. So then you could go, now my history people, we didn't have this last year, but this year we have it on the YouTube, and it's a big hit. How many hits do we have on some of those?
5,000.
We have 5,000 hits on one research, right? So that I only have 60 kids in the class. So unless they're hitting it over and over and over again. So this is a productive thing. So that if you want to watch this again, if it was of value to you, then you can do that if it's on the YouTube. So anyways. when we talk about this aggregate supply, aggregate demand model, we say, okay, this is the big model, this is the one you have to understand. When we did it in class, we started with demand, but now let's start with supply. And so in this model, we say this, all right? We've got here price level. And this is the overall or average price level. We've got here, you could call this output, right? If you look on the Roughonomics site, where I put the, I'm going to try to put up on Edline all the graphs that you need to know on Edline. It should be on the links page. This the Roughonomics site, they call this real GDP. Right? Output, real GDP, maybe the same thing on this axis. Right? And now we're going to draw aggregate supply. Now, aggregate means the sum total of. Right? So when we say aggregate supply, and initially we drew the aggregate supply curve like this, right? In 3 sections. Now, this aggregate supply curve shows us how much output, how much real GDP there'll be at every level of price. Right? So at every level of price, this shows us how much output. Now, the key in this model is somewhere along the way, right? Somewhere along the way, there is a level of output that we refer to as the full employment level of output for GDP. So somewhere amongst this output we say, okay, if this is the amount of goods and services that are produced, then all of the resources in society are being fully used. We call this full employment. Now, at full employment, we say the unemployment rate is at the natural rate of unemployment. Right? At the natural rate. Now, there's a potential to ask a lot of questions about the natural rate of unemployment. But the natural rate of unemployment is the rate, is the rate of unemployment where the supply of labor equals the demand of labor. Right? So the natural rate of unemployment is where the supply of labor equals the demand for labor. So we're saying that at some level of output, this is true. And we just sort of call this full employment. Right? We just sort of call this full employment. Now, this is the key thing in the aggregate supply curve. The key thing is where this is at. Where is full employment, right? So it's here, right? Now, that being the case, we divided the aggregate supply curve into 3 parts, right? This part sometimes is called the Keynesian section, right? This is sometimes called the Keynesian section. But what's true at every level of output here is that every level of output here is a level of output that is significantly below full employment. Therefore, at every point on the aggregate supply curve here, you have some level of unemployment. Now, this intermediate section of the aggregate supply curve here that is upward sloping, right? As you get closer to full employment, in order for firms to produce more, more production, they have to get higher prices. Right? So as you get closer to full employment, higher prices are necessary and higher prices are a reality in the economy. Because firms are bidding resources away from other firms, they're driving prices up. In order to expand output, they have to charge higher prices because they're paying higher prices for resources. So the price level begins to go up, right? And even is going to go up past full employment, which suggests at some level you can produce more output than the full employment level of GDP. You can, right? You can produce more output. The reason that you can produce more output is, even at full employment, there are still resources that could be utilized. People could work overtime, right? You could draw workers back into the workforce, so you could expand output until you get to this level here. And at this level here, we call this capacity.